Hello, and welcome to segment 2 of our course on morality. Our second segment here is going to address the issue of biblical morality. So we want to get right into really the morality from a faith perspective. The question is, what does the Bible really have to say to us about morality? There are a lot of believers who disagree with one another radically about what is right and what is wrong. Isn't there some clear message from the Bible about what morality really is, what we're supposed to do and not do? Is it just a simple matter of the Ten Commandments? What does Jesus really tell us? The next 2 segments of this series is going to deal with those issues. And today I want to talk about more the Old Testament point of view. After we do a little opening kind of challenge here. And the opening challenge has to do with this box. This box is a gift that if you were present with me here today, I would offer to give you if you would pay me whatever money is in your pocket or purse. But all I can tell you about the box is that it has something very valuable in it for you. Would you give me all the money that's in your pocket or purse for this box? But all I can do is say, trust me, it's very valuable. Think about that. How much is in your pocket or purse? Would you give $1, $5, $10, $20? How much do you trust me that whatever is in this box really is valuable? Well, this is a little kind of dynamic or experience that I've done with different groups of people. Sometimes I auction the box off. Sometimes we just have everybody in the room take out all the money that they have and lay it on the table and kind of determine inside themselves whether they're willing to take a chance. The whole point of this is that there's an invitation here, an invitation that costs you something. And you get something in return, but you're not quite sure what it is. And the point of this is, in terms of biblical morality, I guess we could look at it only from the standpoint of, well, tell me what the Ten Commandments are and that's what I'll do. But I don't think that that is really the whole story in terms of what the Bible offers us in terms of morality. Because what we have in the Bible is a God that keeps approaching people and asking them to do something, challenging them, pledging to them His love and faithfulness, and calling them into something that they may not have ever considered on their own. Let's look at some of these stories. Abraham specifically. Abraham is the father of our faith. And so his act of faith was somehow that which got the ball rolling for all of the Jews, the Israelites from the Old Testament and down to today, all of us Christians, and the Muslims. So Abraham is our father in faith. What made his faith so incredible or so important that it loosed generation after generation of believers who followed his tradition? If we look at God's communication with Abraham, which is described in Genesis, we would see a man who lived in Haran, and God came to him out of the blue, kind of, and said, I will be your God, you'll be my man, and I'll make you into the father of great nations. I will bless you profusely. Now, in those days, people generally believed in a whole series of gods. The pagan gods were basically a variety. There was a god for everything. The difference between those gods and this God was that this God demanded that he be the only God, which was challenging. You know, you had a choice between praying to all kinds of gods and getting a lot of gods on your side and one God. Well, Abraham answered God's call. God wanted him to leave home at the beginning, which was a challenge in those days. Go away from everything that's comfortable for you. God didn't give him any real clear direction. Just go to this land which I will give you, and trust me. Well, it was the beginning for Abraham of a real adventure that made him the father of a great nation and the father of our faith. The Old Testament and the New Testament is full of stories like this. We've got Moses, who was called by God to go to Pharaoh and set my people free. How much of a challenge was that? It would be like going to a country where people are oppressed today, Darfur, for instance, and saying to the people that are oppressing the folks in Darfur, set my people free. How many of us would do that? David, King David, given the throne, lots of trials and tribulations, but promised if he would be faithful, he would be made a great king. And he was. Jeremiah, a young man, given the call to be the Lord's mouthpiece in a way, at great personal cost. Jeremiah was persecuted. Hosea, another prophet. God called Hosea to marry a prostitute. And this prostitute, he loved this prostitute, and this prostitute continued to be unfaithful to him. And the Lord was trying to show Israel through that relationship how Israel was unfaithful to God, even though God loved Israel. Mary, the Blessed Mother, called to be the mother of the Lord, but not given any real clear direction of what's this mean? How's this going to happen? How do I act this out? The Lord just calls and asks us to be faithful and take a step each day. So I think when we talk about biblical morality, we have to talk about a number of things that God has revealed to us through the Scriptures. It's not just a matter of law, although that's certainly an important part of it. There's a number of words, all beginning with C, that describe what I would say are kind of a summary of what biblical morality is all about. The first of these words is creation. The Bible's account of creation gives us a God that creates out of love, a God that creates the world and human beings, and they are very good. That sets up a whole positive attitude toward who we are and toward who God is and toward what the world is and really how we find ourselves in the world. It's all good. Very different from some pagan and other primitive accounts of creation that would start off with maybe a more violent or warlike account of how the world was created and who God is. The second word from the accounts in the Old Testament is call. God, as opposed to many other accounts of some of the pagans and primitive gods, God calls individuals to respond to His challenge to be faith-filled people, to walk with Him. So God reaches out to us as humans. And I think we could see this in all of our lives, that God tends to not just sit back and watch what's happening, but God's interacting with us. God calls us to something. We have a mission. And we can see that in story after story after story in the Old Testament. The next word is a word we used in the first segment too, but in the accounts of people's lives in the Old and New Testament, conversion is a big part of it. This call is to change. This call is to be a different person. This call is to maybe set aside selfish values, a selfish approach to life, and look at life from God's perspective. Look at life from other people's perspective and follow another path than what we would normally have followed if we hadn't heard the call. So our job is, how are we going to respond to this call and conversion? The next step here is covenant. Now, covenant is an agreement, a pledge kind of, between God and a person or a people. And in the Old Testament, we have a number of covenants happening, but the call and the conversion lead to covenant, which is a way of life for the community that's bound by certain laws. So we get with covenant a certain expectation on the part of God. There are commandments that follow this. The 10 Commandments that Moses received on Sinai was the people's part of following the covenant. So, and here's another C word. The question is, are the people going to commit? Following this covenant, being the people of God, has great implications. It gave the Israelites in the Old Testament their identity. It gives us our identity as Christians today. Following along this, it's community. So one of the, especially in the Old Testament, but I think as true in the New Testament, although some Christians don't seem to operate this way, morality is all about community. We can't live a moral life in solitary confinement, sort of, in isolation. Who we are in the community, how we lift up the folks who are around us, how we find ourselves to be part of something bigger than what we are, has everything about it as a moral implication. So all these C words, I think, describe what biblical morality really is for us. It's not just a matter of trying to see what Jesus would tell us to do in this or that or the other situation. It's kind of having a sense of all of these things and how they impact our lives. It's a spirituality, biblical spirituality, responding to God's call. And all we have to do is read stories in the Bible. This is why there are so many stories in the Bible. It's only really communicated, or it's best communicated, through story. Now, I know we hear a lot about Old Testament law, and we think of the Pharisees and everything, and we feel like, well, that's all about just, being so much of a stickler and being rigid about the rules. But actually, I'd like to kind of maybe give the other side of the story about Old Testament law, of which the 10 Commandments are a part. there were 613 laws that were given in the Old Testament for everyone who was Jewish to follow. The Ten Commandments is just kind of the highlights of this. But the 613 had to do with every aspect of life, particularly the life of worship, what you can do and what you couldn't do as a faithful Jew. Now, we tend to look at these laws as kind of maybe very inhibiting today. But really, the Jews of the Old Testament and the Jews of today don't see it this way. They see the law of the Old Testament, all the things they could eat and not eat, and what they could do and not do on the Sabbath, etc., as a kind of open book that helped them to see what God's will was. Their obedience to the law was all about having a relationship with God. It gave them an identity. It helped them be who they were. It was a way for them to show God how much they loved God. It's almost like these days you hear about people that are on a sports team, and in order to be on this sports team, they've got to eat certain things and practice in certain ways and just form their whole life around being successful on this sporting team, and they're willing to give everything. It's kind of the same thing about the Old Testament law. It was a discipline that faithful Jews accepted lovingly in those days. And it was a way for them to live out this relationship with God in a very clear way. The other aspect of Old Testament that I want to make sure that we don't miss is that sometimes we think of the God of the Old Testament as being this wrathful, angry, punishing, destroying God, and that somehow in the New Testament this God changes his mind and becomes more loving and understanding, the God of Jesus Christ. And actually, God doesn't change from the Old Testament or New Testament. The people's, I think, sense of who God was, the reality of them coming to a better understanding of God, grows throughout the Old Testament, so that as you get closer to the time of Christ, particularly in the prophets, God becomes much more like the God that Jesus is showing us than maybe the God who rained fire and brimstone on Sodom and Gomorrah, or who destroyed the world with a flood. So the Old Testament's a journey in itself. But the God of the Old Testament is a loving, caring God who really wanted the people to act in a way that they were going to follow him and also be great and prosperous and find everlasting life. Well, no coverage of Old Testament and Old Testament morality would be quite the same without the Ten Commandments. So I want to make sure we do at least a quick coverage of the Ten Commandments. I play a little game sometimes when I do catechist classes, asking people if they can recite the Ten Commandments in order. And it's kind of amazing how many people that this little challenge will stump. And yet it's not as important that we know the Ten Commandments in order as that we know them and know what they tell us about morality. Now, as I mentioned in the first segment, the Catechism of the Catholic Church, this part 3 is about Catholic morality. And it really kind of walks through the Ten Commandments, showing us what our church says about the Ten Commandments, kind of breaking open the Ten Commandments. Well, what I want to do is to try to give you a little sense of what the Ten Commandments really say to us in terms of biblical morality, kind of break them open a little bit for you. I think you know what they probably are. The first commandment is, I am the Lord your God, you shall not have strange gods before me. Well, what does that mean to us today? It means do not have idols. What are we going to put in our lives in place of God? I saw a little cartoon one time where there are two businessmen bowing down in front of an altar with a dollar sign on it. And one said to the other, well, at least we're honest. I don't think today there's any problem with folks worshiping gods or goddesses that are pagan. But we have a lot of other idols in our lives, things that we put in place of God that we have to be careful of. The second commandment is, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. What does this mean? It has everything to do with, on the one end, not cursing, but it has more to do in a positive way with honoring and praising God, giving God the praise and honor that God is due, and not using religion as kind of something to build ourselves up, being hypocritical or boastful about our faith, but really honoring God, not taking God's name in vain. The third one, keep holy the Lord's Day, has to do with time. Give God a little bit of your time. The Lord's Day is 1/7 of the week. So are we giving God the time that we really need to give God in order to reflect the fact that this is the most important relationship we have? We need to spend time with someone in prayer in order to really have a relationship with them. So in order to have a relationship with God, we need to spend time with God. The fourth commandment, honor your father and your mother, has to do with obedience. As Bob Dylan says, you're going to serve somebody, and I think this has to do with honoring your father and your mother, giving them the respect that they're due, but also honoring true, just authority, giving your obedience to people that deserve your obedience, following the path that we're called to follow as good citizens and faith-filled people. The fifth commandment is, thou shalt not kill. And it really has to do with respecting life. I don't think too many of us are actually going to murder anybody. We will come back to some of these issues. But do I uphold the sacredness of life, this creation, life that was created by God, as we mentioned before? How do I do that? The sixth commandment is, thou shalt not commit adultery. Hopefully, none of you or I will commit adultery. But actually, this has to do with the sacredness of sex and the sacredness of all our relationships and our call to be faithful, our call to love, particularly in a sexual way, who we are committed to, and not to use our sex as a kind of a plaything for pleasure only. The seventh commandment is, thou shalt not steal. And this has to do with property, actually, and it has to do with avoiding greed. It has to do with treating other people's property with a kind of justice, not only not taking what doesn't belong to you. It connects in some ways with the eighth commandment. The eighth commandment is, thou shalt not bear false witness. And this has to do with honoring the truth, or having a sense of honor in our lives, honesty. The ninth and the 10th commandment, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, and thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's goods, have to do with, what's this word covet? The word covet is a word for desire. The question is, what do I desire? You know, a lot of times desire is the beginning of either a lot of good things or a lot of bad things. We're called to desire God. Make God the center of our desires, and then everything else kind of will take its rightful place. It kind of goes back to the first commandment in a way. Thou shalt not have any strange gods before me. Desire, honor the true God. Desire what God would have us desire in this world. So again, lustful thoughts, greedy thoughts, all those things that kind of diffuse our desires in all different kind of directions creates a problem. In ending, and this is kind of a trivia question in a sense, but there is a difference between the Catholic and the Protestant version of the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments are found in the Bible in Exodus chapter 20 and Deuteronomy chapter 6. And the Catholic version of the Ten Commandments are numbered different than the Protestant version. The Catholic version start out, and the Protestant version both start out with the first commandment, thou shalt, I'm the Lord your God, they shall not have strange gods before me. But the Protestant version of the Ten Commandments has as the second commandment, do not create any false images, any graven images. And then the third commandment for the Protestants is, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, whereas that's the second commandment, do not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for Catholics. So the Protestants, all the rest of the way through, are one ahead of us. But at the end, the Protestants combine the 9th and the 10th, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife or goods, as their 10th. And for Catholics, that's 9 and 10. So if you see posters and there's 10 Commandments societies and stuff, most of the times on those posters and little placards, it's the Protestant version of 10 Commandments. Just a little note, to help clarify some things for you. This is the end of our second segment of the morality class. Check the Catechist Manual for further readings and worksheets that you're called to do if you want to complete these certification requirements.